I think we're live. So hi everyone, I'm Steve Smedley, Associate Director at Acuity, and welcome to our first webinar for 2021. I'd also like to welcome Nitin Parmar, who's an Acuity Training Associate. He's going to be navigating us through the implications of the new NHF Code, basically from Cosmo to how we got here, but also via what's changed and whether to adopt. Over to you, Nitin.
Right, thank you, Steve. So welcome everyone. So I actually designed a special kind of warm welcome. So it's good to be on a seminar. So I can't see you, but I can feel you. So delighted to be doing this session called a roadmap. So my name is Nitin Parmar. I have a very unusual first name. And it's unusual because it's the same spell forwards and backwards. And we call them palindromes, don't we? I'm very good with palindromes. Don't know why. Maybe my name or something. What I did find out about my name is it means someone who follows the right ethics, or one with ethics. So from Sanskrit, the word niti meaning ethic, and nitin, one who's ethical. I've been in housing for some 35 years, and my whole career has just been like a series of disasters. So from being disciplined in 2 separate organizations, to being sacked, to being made redundant, to going to a tribunal. And out of all of this, I've gone on to do kind of bigger and better things. So for me, training and consultancy is a form of penance. Don't do what I did. There's a better way. Got to look after yourself. And it's all learning through lived experience. With regards to governance issues, I served on the East Thames board for 9 years, did my full 9-year term. And I served 20 years at Upnagar. So I had the best of both worlds. And the way I like to explain that is, yeah, so I had my head and my thinking cap with East Thames board. And my heart has always been with Upnagar. So get the best of both worlds. So what am I going to be talking about today? So want to do a kind of 50-50 split. So I'm going to kind of talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then give about 30 minutes for Q&A. Specifically, I'm going to give you an overview of the whole code. And then we'll talk about a kind of roadmap. So in fact, my overview will be the map, and then we'll discuss what's changed, what's new, some background, what this kind of reset of governance is all about with regards to the code, and then linking it all the way to the white paper and the kind of way forward. Then we'll have a kind of Q&A. So hopefully I've got lots of questions to answer, and then Steve will have some concluding thoughts for the session. So this is going to be my.
Oh, just briefly, Nitin, just before you carry on, I think we're picking up your papers are rustling against your microphone or whatever.
Ah, okay.
So I just flag that up, or it could be a bit of arm waving. I'm not sure, but I just
right. Okay.
All right.
All right. Okay. I'm going to just kind of just calm down a bit. Okay. Just tell me when if that happens again. Yeah. Okay. So and then Steve is going to do the conclusions. Now the new code is outlined in 4 principles. So what it says is, what are we here to do? The first one about mission and values. Second one is about, well, so how do we do it? So what's the kind of strategy going forward? Then is the effectiveness of the board, so what the board's doing with regards to its role and job, or doing its job. And the 4th principle is around control. We call it rigorous oversight and checking. So let me go through the whole code with my kind of special maps. I'm going to switch over to my map, and I'm going to take you through the whole thing. Here we go. Right, can you see that on your screen? Is that okay? Great. Right. So this is my kind of write-up of the whole code onto 1 page. And I'm going to take you through the whole thing in about, say, 10 minutes or so. So the code is 16 pages long. It's got 31 points. So you've got 4 principles, and then you've got 31 points which put the principles into practice, and they're in 4 sections. Starts off with acknowledging 21 people who've been involved in it. So we've got James Dickel, Steve Douglas. So immediately tells us, there's some serious street credibility to this, in who's been involved in actually sort of writing it up for us to go forward. There's a glossary of terms as well, and then it gets going with the introduction, saying that these are standards of governance based on past best practice, what we do really well, and then building on with regards to our roles, our kind of membership requirements, what the strategic leadership role is in order to protect and safeguard our stakeholders. Then it goes on to saying and specifying what is it that we are about. So there are 4 specific requirements in the code. So putting residents at the heart of strategic decision making, stakeholder accountability, equality and inclusion, and environmental sustainability. So these 4 are kind of 4 new themes. And then there is the comply or explain, which I think we are doing now anyway. So let me go through the 4 principles and tell you what the practice requirements are in each of these. So the first one is to have the mission and values in place. So set them, drive the social purpose, set out your mission and values, and embed the whole resident focus and inclusive agenda into what you do. And in practice, it should be reflected in the mission, lead by your mission and values, have a resident focus, providing opportunities and strategic decision processes for residents to be engaged in. Equality, diversity, inclusion, state your commitment, have your board composition reflect the communities served, and publish annual progress reports on how you're doing with this. The organizational culture needs to be defined to deliver your mission, to lead by example, and to have alignment of everything you're doing with your values. Integrity, there need to be high standards of probity, to adopt the code formally, to record any conflicts of interest, to have a public register of declarations. Accountability need to be open so residents can scrutinize and hold the organization to account, to maintain the reputation and trust through our actions. And that is the first principle, and those are the practice points in a kind of summary. The second one talks about strategy and delivery, or how do we do it? And it starts with setting strategy to fulfill our purpose and to remain a viable organization. That there's a strategy, their resources and their plans that set the overall direction for the organization, with financially stable plans, with a key eye on value for money and environmental sustainability. I can never say value for money without mentioning Steve Smedley, so here you go. There's something for Steve as well. Structures, to make sure the structures we have in place support effective delivery of our purpose, and yeah, change if we need to. Working with others is about how we collaborate, but then is to fulfill our purpose. The role of the chief exec to set up the framework of delegation with a kind of contract, appraisals in place, and again, also the authority to terminate, if necessary, the contract. The workforce, the policies in place, that there's an insight into the views of the workforce. The remuneration and well-being of the workforce is taken on board. Performance, there's an oversight on delivery with accurate reports, where the group structures, the subsidiaries, and everyone else supports the work to enhance the mission and purpose of the whole organization. That we are compliant or to take any intervention steps as necessary. The code application and then to deal with conflicts of interest. Where we have joint ventures and partnerships, they are there to support an overarching kind of vision and mission and objectives of what we're about. that the arrangements need to be documented, the benefits and risks must be annually appraised as a result as well. Then the largest section in the code is the third principle. And this is about board effectiveness, or how the board kind of does its job, that it's led by a skilled and diverse board, which reviews performance and this effectiveness and compliance with this code. So then the practice points are roles and responsibilities, setting out statutory roles in terms of who's supposed to be doing what. So things like the chair not being on the audit and risk committee, that executives are not members, that there's a framework of delegation. The functions cannot be delegated with regards to the board. There's compliance with the vision, mission and values. And here you go, the three E's, economy, efficiency and effectiveness, which have been with us for as long as I've been in housing, and to challenge the exec as appropriate. The board composition needs to have regular reviews. You should have 5 to 12, and then you can have co-optees if you want. The executives always need to be in minority, and the chair needs to be appraised by the vice chair. With regards to election, selection and appointment, there needs to be a diverse mix on the board. There must be open recruitment. There must be annual report on diversity and skills and progress that's being made. The committee should enable the board to scrutinize effectively what they've set out to do. Board remuneration needs to be objective with an appropriate mechanism working through a committee, always in the best interest of the organization. Tenure and renewal of the board must comply with the constitution. There must be a strategy for its own renewal and even succession. The 9-year rule, which we know, has now been trimmed down to 6 years, and with the option with the review and kind of business case to extend to 9 years. But the Fed and the code generally recommends 6 years now as a kind of big change. And after the 9-year rule, no reappointments after 3 years. So the 1-year timescale has now been kind of extended to 3 in people coming back. The conduct of business needs to be efficient. The meetings must be quorate with clear agendas and records of minutes, and the conduct of business. Performance review learning must have an annual effectiveness assessment. Then the composition, the skills, the compliance of the code, and for new members, a full induction and continuous development, which applies to the learning for the whole of the board. Appraisals must have full appraisals at least every 2 years, and chair, as appropriate depending on the size of the business, needs to be assessed by a senior member. With regards to compliance, there must be an annual statement which explains compliance or non-compliance, and indeed what plans there are to make sure we are working towards compliance. The fourth principle is about control and assurances, what we call rigorous oversight and checking. So it's to manage risks with the assurance and effective controls, and that we are compliant and that the organization is viable. So the audit process in place must have sound both internal and external aspects of control, and the board must have confidence in the systems and must have an audit and risk committee. With the audit committee, must provide independent scrutiny, must have records minuted, must have an annual meeting with external stakeholders, and then that reports to the board. With regards to risks, there must be arrangements in place to manage the risk and a framework in place. And then there must be organizational resiliency and continuity and contingency plans, as well as stress testing that goes along. Number 4 is compliance in line with our legal and regulation obligation. There must be controls, and there must be safeguarding along with an annual statement. Concerns and whistleblowing, members and staff must be able to raise concerns they have, and that will require independent investigations with proportionate action by the board. So here is the whole code in one page. So I'm going to move on to my presentation and then explain some of the kind of backdrop to it, and then after I finish this bit, which will take me about 15 minutes or so, we'll have a bit of a kind of Q&A. So roadmap then. So changes I'm going to talk about. So since 1995, which was the first one, and we celebrated the Silver Jubilee last year. Cosmopolitan housing, what happened there and what were the lessons? Grenfell and the white paper, and these three kind of some of the drivers to kind of reset how we are going forward. And that's what's been captured in the code itself. This whole question of to adopt or not to adopt the code, and then some points to consider in terms of going forward. Then we'll have a kind of question and answer, and of course Steve's going to conclude. So 25 years, and we're still we're still kind of evolving and growing and learning and moving. So this is the fifth evolution. So the first one was 95, 2004, and then we've had 2010, 2015. So all the work around governance and the codes, they are designed to enhance the sector's reputation, but also to kind of give the board very clear aspects of their own kind of strategic role in how we're kind of doing. In the 25 years, some of the kind of major changes we've seen have kind of resulted in the evolution of the super housing associations. And if we look at places for people with 200,000 homes in management, London and Quadrant, Sanctuary, Clarion, all 100,000 plus landlords. So that's almost kind of sets up the scope of the whole of the code. So it looks at all shapes and sizes. So from the biggest players to the smallest players, well, which is us really. So it's got something for everyone in a sense. Then it talks about purpose and stakeholders, which is just to kind of clarify why we are here, what I kind of spoke about earlier on. And then there is this whole kind of real kind of focus, as I outlined in the introduction in the map, as you saw. It's all about resident focus, customer service, customer satisfaction, the equality, diversity, inclusive agenda, and making sure that we take this on, with greater kind of clarity and purpose going forward. Environmental sustainability, organizational culture, and alignment. So these are quite big themes, quite kind of tall kind of orders in terms of what we need to do. And really, this is the way to becoming a compliant organization, is what the code is all about. So it's always going to be work in progress, and by the time we've kind of updated, there'll probably be another code along the way. So it's an ongoing cycle and process of learning in the way things happen. Some key events that have been captured into the code was Cosmopolitan. Now, 2014, Altair did this this review with the regulator, and their lessons. There are three specific kind of points that I kind of picked on. The first one was just if you look at just the language in terms of the regulator, and their findings were, that involvement was pretty intense. There's weak governance and management, but also the need to kind of strengthen all the kind of governance processes. And these have been, and again, I listened to Stephen Bull, who was one of the authors at a recent kind of session, and what he was talking about was this kind of reset for the sector, and those main themes that I spoke about in the last slide, you know, customer focus, the equality diversity agenda. Then we've also had the tragedy of Grenfell and the white paper. So the white paper was set in motion by the tragic fire at Grenfell. So there was this whole tragedy that happened, and then the white paper kind of picked up on. And then if you see the introduction by Boris Johnson, he recalls two experiences, one 30 odd years ago, visiting a local authority home and finding, you know, how people were living, and there's some pretty kind of strong kind of emotion that he kind of expresses. And then he talks about voices being unheard. And when I read this part of the white paper, I had to really kind of stop and pause a bit, because when you say voices, and you say Grenfell, you know, of course we heard the voices. We heard the voices of pain, anguish, anger, and we also ourselves kind of heard what it is that we did, and we heard, you know, we heard it with our own anger, but we also heard it with our own tears. So that's really what kind of, you know, has got everyone kind of, you know, on kind of, you know, focus in terms of what it is that we wanted to do. So all of that kind of collective efforts kind of crystallized into the first principle, where they're talking about the whole kind of voice being translated into a kind of resident focus, that whole voice being translated into equality, diversity, and inclusion, of having a kind of organization culture that is able to listen, you know, with empathy, and to kind of, you know, do something about it, and to be held accountable with what we're doing. So that's how it's all been captured into the code of governance. And for me, one of the things when I kind of did a very detailed analysis of it, which you saw in my map and overview, is, yeah, and if the code could talk, you know, well, what is the voice of the code? What is it that it would say to us? And for me, what the code is trying to say is, well, listen to what's happening out there, and be part of the change that that you say you want to be, and that, you know, that we are part of the kind of solution, and we've always been part of the solution. So it's that kind of reinforcement, and that kind of, you know, again, clarity, well, which is what the code talks about as well when it says purpose, but that's the purpose. So all these three things point to just one thing, and that one absolutely critical thing is governance. And whether it's cosmopolitan, or whether it's in the sector previously, or indeed Grenfell, which was Kensington and Chelsea TMO, which is the largest TMO in the country. And if we looked at the governance issues there, and then there's always this question, you know, and this question is, hang on a minute, was this TMO set to fail? So the fact that they've now been taken back, you know, so what were the governance issues there? So it's almost kind of answers its own kind of question. So with all the voices we've been kind of talking about, so to adopt or not to adopt is the question. So what is it that we're talking about in terms of adopting? So there is obviously the code, which is what I'm sure everyone is seeing. But then there are two accompanying documents. So there is guidance, and then there's a checklist. And the checklist goes through in detail all the things that I've kind of outlined. So it's these three things, but to these I would also like to add my own map. So I have an analog version, and I also did one digitally originally. So this was for Westfield Housing Association. So again, I think I didn't the digital one didn't look that organic, so I thought I'd kind of try it out, and I did this whole version. And indeed, I've actually got the original, which I think is, this is what kind of looks like. I don't know if you can see it, but we did it by technology. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of information, and if we just look at the code, the guidance, and the compliance checklist, it just takes a bit of attention to get things in place. But it's always about your business, and it's always, what we do in implementing and taking the code on board needs to be proportionate to the size of our business to meet the requirements and the best interests of our key customers and stakeholders. So ideally, you can have someone just sit down and just think it through, or even better if you had a couple of people or a small group. And the starting point is always, what are we doing already? And usually what we find is the 80-20 rule. We always do the 80% we get right. Is the 20% where we end up spending 20%, the 80% of our resources. So it's about just always looking for what it is that we really do well. And again, my whole history and journey, I've always found pockets of excellence, and a lot of stuff we do. And no doubt you've heard this before, we're not really very good at selling ourselves in a manner of speaking. So always start with, this is what we've got already with regards to the code. You can just look at my one page, you can just say tick, 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 this, put out some red lines in terms of what is that we need to focus on. You've got the guidance, and then you've got the checklist, and you can just go through that process very, very quickly. So those are the additional requirements. When we talk about the additional requirements, there's some very specific things. So there are things that we can do fairly easy and straightforward. And then there are some very big asks. So when you talk about alignment and organizational culture, I mean, those are some very, very heavy themes to be thinking about and talking about. Anyway, so additional requirements, annual report on EDI. Then there is a requirement for accountability, that the board publishes information annually about the organization's activities. There is this whole issue about the board tenure. So we've been working with the 9-year rule. I told you I did my 9 years at East Thames. But now what they're saying is we need some churn, that 6 years is a much better time frame. And that way we can build our own diversity and equality into things. And no return back after the 9-year rule. So after we've exhausted, then people will need to be away for 3 years. So you just can't come back after a year and get back into the scheme of things. The comply or explain requirements has been there for a number of years, and I think we all do it in our annual financial statements. So what timeline do we work with? Well, I would say start with April 22. So the Fed, their view is that you should take this on board, as quickly as you can. I would argue the other way around. It's what you call the leadership habit. Is you start with the end. Okay, hang on a minute. Where do you want to end up with? And what else have you got in the mix that needs to be taken care of as well? So it's this process of how we then integrate what is it that we want to do with the code. And then we've got this time frame to work with. So this is what we call, it's really important stuff. It's not urgent. You're not going to have the regulator knocking on your door tomorrow if you don't have a position statement on it. But it's really important. So you take your time, you think it through, you make sure you get the fit, and you get it right by design. But what's the kind of counter argument, you know? So why would you not adopt? So, well, you may say, hang on a minute, we've seen the Charity Commissioners Code of Governance. We are a charity, and we love that one because it's a lot easier and a lot clearer, you know, for us to kind of work with, which is fine. But and then you may say, you know, the NCVO, that's another one that we like. But yeah, okay, so why not have a look at all three as a board and see, you know, what is it that fits your purpose and your vision and you know, what you want to do. But the funny thing is, you know, all these sectors have been talking to each other, you know, in terms of complying their own kind of compiling their own code. So you find that there won't be things that are that kind of radically different. So the effort involved, whether you kind of adopt or not adopt, is going to be a kind of, you know, a marginal one. But for me, that margin is where your purpose and what your vision is about as an organization, as a business, is what you kind of consider. So in terms of going forward, how do we then sort of, you know, with all that I'm kind of throwing at you, how do we then kind of get on with it? So really, you can start with a clean slate. You know, my friend Indran, you know, from Shein, he always talks about, hey, there's always an opportunity. So what is it that we can do to really get everything kind of, you know, going? So start with a clean sheet and say, what is it that you want to put? Or if you've had a strategic update where you've got very clear kind of alignment between your top line and your bottom line, that everyone is on board, then it's going to take you a lot less time to do. Because this is what the, I think about 15 odd years ago, maybe even longer, this is what the Audit Commission was talking about: alignment of top line, mission, vision, values, bottom line, results, successes, KPIs, targets achieved, outcomes, outputs, and so on. So it's that kind of alignment of anything and everything, and also the golden thread, some organizations call it, in the kind of business planning and stuff. So it's really about how we have a kind of performance system that makes it easy for like regulators and banks and funders and other stakeholders to understand our organization very, very simply across all kind of dimensions, vertically and horizontally. So once you've then kind of looked at which way you're going to go, then you can start with some quick wins. But I always say, you know, under promise and over deliver. So if you then map out and you say, okay, look, we're going to focus on, I don't know, 10 things, but we're going to kind of spread them out over a 3-year business plan or 5-year business plan, then maybe you go down to 6. So it's better to achieve those 6 and then continue the journey of success and build on success than to have, like, you know, 30 things you're going to do and then find something happened and then you couldn't deliver about 10 of those. Then it's not a really very good way of moving forward. So really, it's all about voices, isn't it? So we want to hear what these voices are, and then we want to put our voice to it, and then we want to get working on it. So thank you for listening.
Right. Thanks for that, Nitin. That's pretty comprehensive. We've got a stack of questions in. Just briefly, just before we go to the questions, just so I'm clear,
yeah.
And there are times when I can be a bit thick, so apologies if this is really obvious. But just in terms of your previous slide there, talking about next steps,
yeah.
When you're saying sort of go through and kind of prioritize and be proportionate and look to see what you might be able to do, and there might be some quick wins.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that you can't actually cherry pick what you might want to do from a code? You either take the whole code and nothing but the code. You can't treat it as some kind of smorgasbord or some kind of menu of things that just suit you.
Yeah. It's actually, the answer is kind of halfway between your question. So it's like you you do the best of both, because there are certain things. If you're a small housing association, so this bit about having group structures, I mean, that's just not going to apply to you. So it's almost like taking things out that don't need to be kind of concerned with, and that's your kind of scoping exercise when you start by looking at what is it that you want to do. So yeah, you can't kind of cherry pick how you're going to deal with with your customers, for example, because that is what the deal is. So when you sign up to the deal, you're saying, yeah, okay, so we're going to look at it very carefully in how it relates to our business. And I think it's that fit which is the important question here.
Right. And so I guess what you're saying is it's part of that evaluation,
yeah,
in terms of should you adopt or not to adopt, is that there are other codes out there, and you mentioned the Charities Commission, and obviously there's other ones.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're saying is, and this might particularly be the case for smaller associations, is there might be other codes that have a better fit with this particular one. One further one, and just and it's going to tie in with the first question that I'm going to pick up from Martin Collett at English Rural, is, I mean, to some extent, do you think that the Nat Fed came up with this code with bigger associations in mind, or do you think they've come up with this code knowing that there's a stack of smaller associations out there that need to probably take it quite seriously?
Yeah. They've actually done a bit of both, and I mean, and if you look at it in terms of proportionality, so what is it? It's that 90-10 rule, wasn't it? 10% of the largest association on 90% of all our stock.
Yeah.
I think it's even more dramatic now. 95% of all the big associations own 95. So what the way they've gone about it is they've issued separate guidance for smaller associations. And also, if you look at the guidance, they mention that one is they're trying to kind of keep the whole sector together with all its own kind of diversity. So if you think about the requirement for equality, diversity, inclusion, it's almost like there's the kind of underpinning theme that's there to just make sure you don't kind of separate big and medium and small, that is just one sector, and that we have unfinished business in the way we kind of go forward. And they've tried to accommodate the big players, but also the kind of the small players, and they always kind of because I think the thing, it's very easy to kind of sometimes just catch one side of a whole, but look at the whole picture first before you kind of say something. So in all fairness to the Fed, okay, I think also, okay, they're quite keen to get people kind of on board very, very quickly, whereas I would argue start from the end, look at where you want to end up with this, and then work backwards, and then it's how you then kind of integrate the code into the very essence of your working. So it's not a kind of add-on of sorts, which is the danger, really. So no, I think they've tried to hit all buttons at the same time.
Right. Okay, that's good. So the thing, it's I suppose it's scalable, and it's about taking a proportionate approach, which is always what we need to do for smaller associations. So picking up Martin's question, I am going to read it out.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question. It definitely picks up on just what we've been talking about. What Martin's saying is, for specialist organisations like English Rural, where we don't pay board members, recruiting strong candidates is not always easy. Yeah. Our brand and culture are what make our reputation and performance strong. Because of this, my view is that the default will be to hope to retain board members for 9 years rather than 6, i.e. if it ain't broke, you don't want to fix it. And, business continuity and all that. Can we have a default business case for doing so? There is also the issue, and this is a practical issue, there's also an issue of administering the compliance of more rapid board rotation, which smaller HAs will find more challenging to resource. And then he says, what has the RSH's response to the 6-year rule been?
Yeah. Okay, I'll go backwards. So the RSH was actually involved in developing the code. So they were part of actually developing it. So that's easy. So they are part of the people who designed the whole thing. With regards to the 9-year rule, it's so as long as you have a clear, and in fact you answered your own question, Martin, in part, is yeah. So you've already so if that's your default position and that you have difficulty recruiting, that's one way of doing it. And the code doesn't say you can't have 9 years. It says yeah, okay, as long as you have the review processes. So remember, there's the appraisal requirement at least every 2 years. So if you had something like that in place, that would tell you. And also, I think it's the third principle, which talks a lot about what the board can and can't do. So have another look at what those requirements are. And the third part of your question was board rotation. It's all about innovation and creativity. I told you about Indran. He says he's always looking for, yeah, what's the opportunity here? So it's always a kind of challenge, but we don't do enough of things like, twinning. Why not twin with another kind of organization that that you can kind of work with, or that's kind of local to you, because sometimes distance can be a kind of factor as well if you're rural. So how about twinning with other boards, or how about doing a kind of mutual exchange of board members, so and that way you can bring in diversity. And then also you can share, but also we can kind of share our own kind of experiences. So we just need to sometimes just kind of think a bit more creatively in going forward. So there are, and so if you wanted to, so for example, if you were committed to say, I think, churn 6 years would be really great. How do we make it work? So think of things that, that are a bit off the cuff, or, outside of the box. Yeah, twin, mutual exchange, get someone on board, So so I hope I've answered your three parts of your question.
Okay, thanks for that, Nitin. I know it's certainly been raised before, is having some kind of mutual exchange swap shop for board members. It would be a useful central resource if you could have a skills matrix combined with, I guess, dates of tenure, so that things could be married up. And I think that's definitely one to put on the back boiler for either the Nat Fed setting up something like that, or even perhaps a role for Acuity with something like that. Right, next question, Glynis. She's saying, how public should the register of declarations of interest be? Should this be available via the website, for instance, or would just having them from each board meeting suffice?
It is what you deem to be kind of proportionate, and if you want to put it up on your website, that's fine. Or if you want to have a register, as long as you have some kind of reasoning for it. So who is it for? Is it, so how transparent and open do you want to be? Do you want to be absolutely transparent and have things, so yeah, okay, so we invite you to come and have a look. This is where we post it. So if you post it publicly, it just takes the kind of pressure off you, is one way. But then what's the kind of effort involved? Or do you want to maintain some level of kind of formality where, you're serious about it and what you have is worth looking at, and then you can invite people? Or maybe you can just have particular times where you have this dialogue with your own kind of customers in terms of what is it that works for them. So who is it that you're doing for? So if it is what your customers want, they want to see everything that you're doing in the way they hold you accountable. I think that was in the first principle. Yeah. So just go by what your customers say sometimes.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Nitin. On to Duncan Aitkins, and he's saying, what about small co-ops? Do all the principles apply?
Yeah. So the principles apply. So the principles, you can't kind of cherry pick in a sense, because they just tell you what the whole kind of framework is. But it's the practice bits which you then go through and say, okay, this applies to us, this applies, this doesn't apply. and then you take a view. And I think something I didn't say in my presentation is that there needs to be the board kind of, having a look at this in a kind of really meaningful way. And that way they can determine what is it that's going to kind of work for you and not. And then you can get to the kind of planning process that I described earlier on. So yes, look at the principles, look at what's going to work for you. And if you need to look at other kind of codes, like, the Charity Commission and so on, have a look, and that if whatever what Steve was saying, is, what kind of fits your business is what you go for at the end of the day.
Right, thank you for that. A question from David Morland, and basically he's saying, how much does the compliance checklist or whatever compare to the 2015 version, or what are the key changes to the compliance checklist? I guess that just maps to whatever the key changes in the code are. Would that be right?
It's the things that are outlined at the beginning in the introduction, and it's those four kind of themes, residents at the heart of all strategic decision making, stakeholder accountability, equality and inclusion, and environmental sustainability. So because these are the four themes, and you heard some of the backdrop to Grenfell and Cosmopolitan in terms of why it's been sort of captured into the code. So with regards to the older version, it was a longer compliance checklist. This is a bit shorter, so it's just really, but you don't have much of a choice in terms of the kind of checklist. And also with regards to the checklist, not all of it is going to apply to small associations. I keep on repeating this point. So just pick the ones that are kind of relevant to you. So there are certain ones which immediately you'll kind of rule out of the equation, and then go through the checklist. Because if you went through the whole checklist, it's actually quite kind of detailed. But we've now got a shorter one, but we've got kind of different themes in it.
Right. Okay. A couple of observations from Aziz Rahim, and these may be controversial, so it'd be interesting to see what your take is, Nitin. What he's saying is board tenureship has come down from 9 to 6 years. If members start coming back after 3 years, then it defeats the purpose of a 6-year tenureship. He also says that perhaps recycling of board members are a sign of poor governance. Controversial or what? What do you? What's your response to that?
Yeah, really, this just tells you, how effective is the board. So remember the third principle, which is about the board doing its job. So how effective was the board? So if a board is effective, all things being equal, so you've got your induction, you've got your assessments, you've got your skills mix, you've got your appraisals, you've got your continuity planning, you've got your succession planning, and you really are an effective board, really keeping its house in order, would mean that we don't have to deal with these questions. So in a sense, it's, have we succeeded in what we set out to do as a board? I think the word we hear nowadays is efficacy. It's all about board efficacy. In have we done the business? And if we have, then we wouldn't have to be kind of contending with this kind of, controversial type of issues in terms of revolving chairs and people coming back, regularly and kind of routinely. So it really is, how have we kind of developed in a sense? If we look at resident focus and say residents on board, I mean, that's a really good test for a board in terms of have we got tenants that have come on board, and have we kind of been successful? Have we got meaningful integration of, tenant members? That would be a good kind of test. So that's another pool in terms of, talent we can tap into to kind of develop. Because is that another sort of the Grenfell question that I asked earlier on, in the governance? Okay, so for a minute, was this whole board set up to fail? So is that test that we have for ourselves as a board in terms of how good you are with what you say you're doing?
Right, okay. And I'm guessing that it's obviously having new blood come through, from time to time is good because it provides a different perspective. But in terms of recycling that blood, you might not necessarily want to necessarily recycle it after a satisfactory period back into your organization, but keeping that expertise in the sector and recycling it elsewhere, I would have thought is not a bad thing.
No.
Right, I'll crack on. David Morland's saying, did I miss it? Is the regulatory framework referred to in the code?
They're just two very, very separate kind of things in a sense. So if you look at governance as an issue and you look at regulation as an issue, they're two very, very different things. So they're both kind of mutually beneficial. So if you look at both of them, between them, they're supposed to provide a kind of synergy for us. So whether it's here or there, well, we know the way it's actually been developed, it has involved the regulator in a manner of speaking, but it's really to the mutual benefit of both, the code or governance and regulation. So if you have effective governance, you don't have issues with regulation. And if you comply with the key regulatory requirements, then you've got some kind of good governance going on. That's why they're not kind of bothering. So there is that kind of synergy between these two, which I think, in a sense, overall, what is it about at the end of the day? It's about the reputation of the sector, and it's just having these synergies kind of make us do this. And just to kind of just extend this further, this is and you hear this, and I've heard this many times, your Devonshires, your James Tickells and your Stephen Bulls, and they always have. I know James came to one of our board sessions at Upnagar, and it's like your reputation. How are you going to handle a Daily Mail headline about your housing association going bust? So if you think about us as a sector, I mean, we have a really good reputation, compared to bankers, for example, right? So it's this, it's how do we sort of just keep our kind of house in order? And if you look at the code and what it's saying, purpose, man, it's really coming down to purpose. It's about just knowing what we are. So yeah, we just need to make sure everything kind of works as a kind of whole, and that there's clarity in the way we go forward.
Yeah. Okay, we haven't got much time, so I really want to crack on if we can. Bill Taylor's saying, how practically can tenants be involved in setting strategy? Because, traditionally this is a board function. And I think some of this dates back to way back when we had the TSA and we were looking at the CIH's concept of resident-led self-regulation. It's about really involving tenants in the important, clever stuff. You got any bright ideas, Nitin?
keep on coming back to, so are we setting people up to succeed or to fail in an organization? So it doesn't matter at what level. If you're looking at strategic decision making, one of the things that I've done for a number of years now is a residence training program that Tower Hamlet does. And so I've been doing it for a number of years now. And some of the talent I've seen that come on these courses is absolutely mind-boggling. So I had, last week I had someone who's an international HR consultant. I've had scientists. I've had nurses. Some of the kind of people I've kind of come across, and in a sense, I mean, I've learned from them. It's like, and you're saying it's like, you can. So all this idea of kind of strategy and so on, or hey, you come to a course that I do, on leadership, I'll teach you all about strategy in a day, So, and if we have a residence program that does this, hey, we've got, in the same way we're talking about, mutual exchange for boards. Hey, why don't we have a kind of, a forum for residents to learn strategic management? It's all learnable stuff, So it's how do we then sort of, get people kind of equipped to work with us at that level? So usually when we have residents join a board, and I don't know, say maybe, you work in a hospital frontline, I don't know, you are a nurse or something, and you haven't had experience of kind of strategic management in a sense, Yeah, so maybe you have a year-long learning program. So if you look at the code, it's principle 3. So one of the things it talks about is, inducting board members and developing everyone, in all board members, to deliver the purpose of the organization. So it's actually in the code in terms of how do we get people equipped up. What I'm saying is the code gives you legitimate grounds to equip tenants up to learn strategic management, and that way you can get them involved. So any good business is all about the investment, and the investment is upfront. You've got to invest in skilling up your tenants, and sometimes it's not even about money. It's not even about money. You've got existing board members with all the kind of talent and skills and experience and competency, and they can kind of have. So in Upnagar, on the board, if you join the board, you would have, when you started, you'd have a buddy. So you'd have an induction program, and you'd have a buddy that takes you through. And your induction program at your appraisal, it's not ready till you've ticked off your appraisal form or your induction program. So it's how do we kind of get people skilled up to succeed? Otherwise, if we don't deliberately and intentionally set people up to succeed, well, we're just setting them up to fail.
Okay, thanks. And just so people know, rather than knock this on the head now, because I think it's too interesting, I'm going to let this carry on. We are recording it. So those of you that need to, got other meetings to go to, don't worry about it. We're going to let all the questions play out, and you'll be able to pick the story up from the recording that we're going to be putting on the website, along with Nitin's presentation and materials. So don't worry about it. So we're just going to kind of crack on with this. So I thought that was really useful, Nitin, in terms of understanding how you can ensure that your tenants aren't set up to fail. And of course, we've known for some years that you don't necessarily, it would be great to have tenants on the board. You don't want them to fail, but by the same token, what's probably more important in terms of good governance is having the right mix of skills. So you've given us some ideas there. I think the other thing that I've been picking up about how you reflect the tenant's voice, if you like, in, well, not just in shaping services and priorities, but even contributing to strategy. What I'm starting to see more interested of in the sector is setting up, whether it's tenant panels or /tenant/stakeholder panels that bolt directly into the board And it's not just a talking shop, it's a sounding board, but it's also a sounding board that the board has to take quite seriously in its deliberations on key business decisions, not least of which is resource allocation decisions. So all I'd flag up is there are other ways to skin the cat other than getting board members on the board. So I'll just flag that, and that should segue into your mate Indrant's question, which is, you got any top tips about how, you've said how you might support tenants being fully functioning board members, any top tips about their recruitment?
You've just got to keep your eyes and ears open. So usually it's how do you kind of, set out your net, how big is your kind of trawl in a sense. And you listen to who's, your housing officers, your frontline staff who know. With us, when we talk about kind of voices, we are very close, in fact, I think, Steve, you were there at a kind of recent meeting where I think one kind of chief exec was saying, they're keeping personal contact with each and every one of their tenants at least once every 2 weeks, Yeah. So that's how close we are to our customers, small associations.
Absolutely.
So when I worked at Astra, we knew everyone. It's like, and everyone knows us. Yeah. So it's how close what's that kind of relationship? And you're always looking for talent, and the thing is with talent, if we can't find it, hey, we make it. It's like Alexander, hey, we'll find a way or we'll make a way. It's like, who is out there and what is it we can do? And then you can throw out your net and say, right, okay, so this is what we're looking for. This is what involved. And again, we should start thinking about places that we wouldn't usually kind of think about, so schools, I don't know, places of worship, even, you would be surprised at what you find, and also a lot of times, there are people if you think about, a board role, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've asked people to kind of join boards. So one of my training courses is Introduction to Housing, right? So you meet all kinds of people at every level, board members, frontline staff, and so on. And the people who are always kind of interested, people who especially kind of, any kind of management role, is like you'd say, have you thought of kind of board membership of housing associations? And people haven't even thought about it. And it's almost like there, it's just something, how are you missing it, So it's how do we get people to recognize that, if you have board experience on your CV, in terms of, value to any business you go and work with, it's absolutely phenomenal. Having strategic business experience, with a board in a housing organization, would be a fantastic thing to have on anyone's CV,
Yeah. I think so. It's definitely right. Getting all your staff, quite often staff are in their little silos. They got their job, but it's about, them being the eyes and ears, I guess, for spotting talent potential.
Yeah.
I think there's another possibility, which is use your tenant surveys to hoover up prospects. I think everybody, as we go forward with a white paper and prep for consumer regulation, needs to up the ante in terms of tenant participation. So people will be thinking about how to get that tenant participation in general. And certainly, again, going back to resident-led self-regulation that was all the rage 10 years ago, that was very much about using all different forms of tenant participation, your tenant participation matrix, through various different fora, and identifying people through your through all forms of tenant participation and feedback as prospects, to then go through the process that you said about their development onto a board, I guess. Right, I'm cracking on with the questions. Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, just one quick point to add. Yeah, and the thing is, if you can't get your residents, if there's other associations that have surplus people that are waiting to get on a board, hey, get them. Have tenants from other organizations on board. Certainly give you a bit of a kind of variety and diversity, in a manner of speaking.
Okay. So Paul Fennell or Fennell says, how does the NatFed's code differ from the code of governance produced by the Charity Commission?
Yeah, the Charity Commission version is a bit kind of simpler in the way it's kind of laid out. So it doesn't have that whole kind of housing dimension that we have with all the different kind of stakeholders we have. So it's just a bit different in terms of substance or the kind of principles. You'd be hard pressed to find any principles that are different in any code of governance. If you had, I don't know, from 5 different sectors, you'd be hard pressed to see, because there was when the 2010 version was written, there was this whole kind of idea of kind of bringing and sharing practice from other sectors as well. So now it's got to this, they all look the same, it's like, okay, which one do you want to pick? But I think what the point I'm trying to make here is, I can't remember the last time someone told me, hey, we looked at the Charity Commissioner's version and that's the one we really like and that's the one we're going for. Well, why haven't you looked at, why aren't we looking at other stuff? So have a look and then make your own mind up.
Right, brilliant, thank you. Steve Kemp's got just a quick question. Is the reduction of length of term to 6 years applied retrospectively?
No, it can't be retrospective. So you can only start from where you are now. So say your board looks at the code and it says, we will adopt it on, I don't know, the 1st of April, 2022. Then anything up to that point is not going to count. But what you will do as a board is you will look at, who is coming up for retirement, who's done 6 years, who's done 9 years, and just considering the 6 years and the 9 years, and having that kind of discussion, and then a record of it is what is required in terms of the code. So no, you can't retrospectively apply something. I mean, in law, you wouldn't do that,
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. And you may have kind of answered this when we were chatting about it a bit earlier, but Phil Green's saying some of the requirements of the new code will take some time to work through. Might the right approach be to stick with the current code pending adoption of the new code in, say, 2022? Or better to adopt the new code early, but declare those aspects that are not yet in place?
No, start with the end, use a leadership habit, look at where you want to get to and then work backwards. Because if you adopt, it's like you're just going all over the place. So it's better to just start from the end. And then what happens is you've got a better time frame. Remember I said it's important, it's not urgent.
Right. So what you're saying is stick with the existing code, but start to put in place the gaps.
And then get your board to talk to think April 2022, and then work backwards, and then they can decide. Or they could just look at it and say, hang on a minute, we did all of a strategic review, we did all our alignment, last year we've got the business plan, we've got this is here, this is here, this is here. So to adopt this, the only thing we need to do is have another look at the quality diversity requirements, the environmental sustainability, which we did already. So they're just bits. These are 3 things we need to add on. Hey, we could just integrate this, without much problem. And when we review our annual service plan, we'll just put all this stuff in here. Hey, we're ready, bring it to the next board and we'll approve. Okay. If all members agree, that is, yeah.
Okay, right. And Duncan Atkins come back on the issue of doing an audit. You sort of raised the issue of doing a compliance audit or whatever in terms of the annual review. What he's saying is, who would do that?
Well, I would always say, always have your own house in order. If you can do it yourself, that's the easiest way of doing it. Why? Because you'll have knowledge and insight into your own business. Usually our first kind of port of call is say, oh, we need to get someone from outside. Yeah, well, but what's the business case for it? If you've got the knowledge and the work is going to add value to your business, then do it yourself. Keep it in-house. Get a small group of people. So good kind of the code of governance is a really meaty kind of subject to get hold of. With a group of people, and big people. In different parts of the business, and get everyone's voice into what you're doing, because it talks about alignment, and that's a good way of kind of demonstrating how you're dealing with alignment. So yeah, so do it yourself. If you haven't got the resources or the expertise, then hey, look, you can always talk to us at Acuity. We're always happy to help out.
Okay, thanks. Helen Marson is saying, yeah, what's the process once the board's decided to adopt the new code? I guess we're saying, who do you have to tell?
It just needs to be recorded formally in your minutes, board minutes, and it's also a good kind of item to have in a tenants newsletter, for example, or you can just put it up on your website, as a kind of what are we doing, an update.
Yeah. Okay. John Howes, I'm going to skip yours, but he's just asking about tips on defining, measuring and monitoring culture. I think it might take us a bit off piece, and I think we could do an entire seminar on that. Yeah, we might get you back actually, Nitin, to kind of deal with a cultural thing. I think that would have a lot of benefit to people. Ian Cunningham's just commenting on the overlap between the white paper and the associated governance regulatory standard, and this new code, saying that basically much of the code will be reflected in the regulatory requirement anyway. And I think this picks up your previous point that yes, there's synergy, I think was the word that you used.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can say that that's done. Yes, Philip, you're going to get all these materials, including Nitin's organic version. Yes. Yeah. Organic free range governance code write-up. So I'm going to skip to. I'm just going to do a couple of last ones.
Just a quick tip. Yeah. So when you print out the template, do it on A3. It looks a lot better on A3, and you will be able to read my writing as well.
Yeah. Right. So let's have a look. Right, I'm going to try and wrap things up now, guys. There's just one from Philip Green. Traditionally, we've reserved a seat on our board for a tenant member, but recent governance best practice advisors recommend against this approach. In other words, tenants should be appointed to the board because they will make great board members, not simply because they're tenants. I know we've kind of touched on this, but the point is does the new code contradict this advice?
It's not always in terms of kind of what the code says or what it doesn't say. What it is saying is, are you hearing? Are you listening to your customers? Have your customers got a voice? And this whole idea of kind of a voice, which we've and Grenfell, that was the loudest we've heard, right? And I spoke about this. It's how do if we want to have this, so if you've already made this sort of decision that we need to have one board member, then there's just one question you need to ask yourself: are you going to set this person up to succeed or to fail?
Yeah.
And also, if you then wanted to have a look at your own business, and again, I mean, in terms of our business, what is the kind of voice we need? Do we need 1 people, 2 people, 3 people? And sometimes you have just 1 as a token, you're setting people up to fail. Don't do it. You know, you're wasting everyone's time. So if you're going to do it, put your heart in it, do it right.
Yep.
And that way, what happens is, you know, that's your kind of rap, man. That's a reputation on the street, is people understand that this is a business that means business. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just kind of almost kind of, you know, creates a kind of a positive vibe on the streets for you. So people want to do business with you, you know.
Okay, so last one from both Caroline and Maureen.
Okay.
Is basically from an audit perspective, if a housing association's using the social housing sort, is it acceptable to move to charity commission or other code?
I'm not sure. I think maybe you need to, you know, this is one for the solicitors, you know, rather than someone, you know, who's not legally qualified like me. So it's what's in your your constitution, and you know what are your terms, and you know what are your, because it's very difficult to kind of answer in kind of isolation. But hey, just call the charity commission up, say, you know, this is what we're thinking of doing. You know, what do you want us to, you know? So that would be the kind of obvious way of doing it, but it's difficult for me to kind of answer a specific question like that.
Okie dokes. Yeah, and I think I would have thought there is probably some kind of space between accounting practice, which is essentially what the SORP's all about, and the fact that the housing association, you know, is directed to do their accounts in accordance with SORP, but notwithstanding that, there is within the sector the option of going for numbers of different codes. So I would have thought the 2 things aren't mutually kind of incompatible, as it were. Any road up. I'm going to very, very quickly sum up, because I forgot that I was supposed to do that, and Nitin pointed out right at the start that I probably need to do that. So here we go. I think what we've got in this new code is continuity in terms of where we've been going with good governance over the past 10 years. This is simply the latest iteration. I think it's an iteration that reflects Cosmo and a number of other associations that hit the proverbial fan over the last few years. But probably also it very much reflects Grenfell. And what we're talking there is a narrative that I think is very much leveled at bigger associations, which is what used to be leveled against municipal landlords, that they're big, responsive, monolithic, and they don't listen. So I think what they're trying to address in this new code is definitely about being sensitive, listening to the tenant's voice, playing the tenant's voice into strategy, service shaping, whatever. It's also about landlords being held to account, where all of that is bound up in the actual culture of the organization. I think adoption of the new code is about taking a proportionate approach. It's also about understanding business and understanding which code might be the best fit for your business. It may be that this code is aspirational. It'll take you some time to actually get there, but if it is the right code for you, it could be a work in progress over a year, perhaps a couple of years, where you start to fill the gaps before you adopt the new code. Is that all right, Nitin?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Thanks for that, Steve.
No worries. Okay, so we've kept people too long. It's all my fault. I apologize for my timekeeping, but hopefully it was still dead useful to you all. All Nitin's materials are going to be available on the website, as will a recording of this. We will be bringing you more of these webinars very soon, so we'll get in touch with you about that. And thanks so much for turning up and putting up with us. So see you all later. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.